Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning in the final training in our CCR series. We know you have lots of different ways you can spend your time, and taking a Wednesday morning to talk and think about research is all, it tells us something very special about all of you all. So we're really glad to have you with us. And for those of you who have your cameras on, we really enjoy, and we also understand that sometimes people are multitasking or are also just zoomed out. But if you can, throughout the training, participate with cameras on, we always appreciate that. It's good feedback for our presenters as well. So we're here this morning with Eric Mankowski and Christopher Hall. A couple of reminders as we're getting going. This is being live streamed on Facebook, so if anyone is participating that way, feel free to put comments or questions in the Facebook section. We are recording this as well. And for those of you participating here with us on Zoom, a reminder that when you're not speaking to please keep yourself on mute, but feel free to unmute when there's time for questions or throw those in the chat as well. We want this to be participatory and interactive as it can be. At the end of the training, you'll also receive a certificate after you complete a short survey with us. That feedback is welcome and will help us enhance and improve trainings as we move forward for you all. So welcome. Thank you all for your work across the state. We're excited to have you all with us this morning, and I'll pass it to you, David.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you in the background to Terry. I am so happy that you are all here, and this is really, it's been a great series. Today's session concludes this 7-part, 30-hour training on elements of the coordinated community response, and this may not seem like it's part of the coordinated community response, but it absolutely is. We have to really understand research about the work that we are all engaged in, both what it's saying as well as how to talk about it and the language. And both of our trainers today I've known for a long time, and consider them to be an asset to us nationally and really beyond. Both Eric Mankowski and Chris Hall will be sharing presentations today. We'll be engaging in conversations, taking your questions, and we're just looking forward to your interest in this. You know, this isn't I don't know about you, but it's not the class that I look forward to when I was in college. And when I talked with Eric and Chris, I didn't hold back at talking about, what they both know, which is we're not really that well prepared. I don't want to speak for everyone, but in general, as a field, as a movement, we're not really that well prepared to engage in the conversations and, to understand what this research is saying versus that research. So with that in mind, I'm really happy to turn it over. We'll be hearing first from Chris Hall. Then we'll be having a short break and a short meeting, 5 minutes. And then Eric will be doing the second part of the presentation today. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, David. All right, so welcome everyone. I think it's interesting to start off by just look at this slide. There's a lot going on here, right? I mean, you've got text in different parts. You've got like a post-it note on one place. There's a paper clip somewhere. There's like spots of ink. There's the New Mexico Coalition. There's UNC Greensboro. There's a lot going on this slide. And in a way, I think this is a nice way to start off the conversation, because this is exactly what happens with research, is that there's just so much going on at the same time from different places that when you just look at this, your eyes go all over the place and it can get overwhelming. You're not sure what to read first, how to read it, where to go with it. And research is challenging at the best of times. But when you're thinking about intimate partner violence research, whether it's working with victim survivors or whether it's working with perpetrators of intimate partner violence, it's even more complicated. because it's not standard research. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is setting the stage for just thinking through and understanding some of the foundational components of what research is in social sciences. And then Eric is going to get into some of the specifics in his presentation, and we have a sense of competency about how to understand and just comprehend research. It's important to have some of these foundational pieces. And I'm not convinced that our educational system or setup gives us these sort of opportunities to have these conversations about the pragmatics are involved with that. There we go. So let's see, there we go. An overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the foundations of research, which is a lot of jargon and esoteric crap that really you only often need to know about if you're getting your PhD. The philosophy part of a PhD is thick with the foundations for research. However, I believe that if you can have basic understanding for some of those concepts, it opens your world in understanding many of the limitations and strengths of research and understanding researchers. I'm going to talk about methodologies, various kinds of research, and places where battering intervention and intimate partner violence research can hopefully work to build and expand, and some of those pieces of research in social sciences that maybe are not the best fit for this kind of work. I'm going to be talking about critical thinking on statistics. I know that most of us have a complicated relationship with statistics and where it fits. Social science has an even more complicated relationship with statistics. So I'm going to be giving you some food for thought on thinking through and understanding statistics. And those of you who are afraid of it or afraid of math, it's not going to be about that. It's going to be instead thinking about where do these fit within research in general, but also within social services as a whole. And then finally, I'm going to be thinking through research strengths and limitations and how to kind of understand where we're at, where we can go. So I love this name. I think that this actually does a great job of explaining where research wants to be and where it is that we are conflicted and have problems within research. Within research, there are these things called philosophical paradigms that, again, I said is kind of the esoteric crap that that you deal with when you get your PhD in some sort of social service. It really, these philosophical paradigms help to understand how researchers approach their work, how they think through their work. And sometimes these sort of thoughts and understandings are unknown by researchers. Sometimes they're invisible. Sometimes they're behind what is being done in the research. And the more that you can understand these backgrounds, the more that you can understand that in practice, research tends to focus on results and de-emphasizes philosophy. In many ways, we need to do the opposite in our work, where we're dealing with concepts and ideas that are so hard to encapsulate with numbers. Intimate partner violence is infinitely complicated. And so you can't expect that any one research study is going to give you all the answers with that. So really, where we want to be with research is where research is a basic reflection of reality, right? We want to be able to read something, take some sort of write up about a human phenomenon and be able to say, no, this is really the way things work. But that never happens, particularly in social science. In physical sciences, that does happen because you are able to take various pieces of chemistry, of biology, of physics, and you're able to test those again and again because the numbers don't change, because the dynamics can always be replicated exactly. With humans, humans are infinitely complicated and infinitely varied. And so it's really hard, if not impossible, to get a reflection of basic reality within social science research. But we want to at least get a basic sort of distortion. So, we want to have some ideas behind what we're doing, but know that there are places that it's not quite right. It's not a perfect reflection. Unfortunately, in most social science research, we're in this third stage where there's really an absence of basic reality. And with an absence of basic reality, we really need to question what is the reality that's being put forward by this information, and if that reality that's being put forward even fully exists in the way that the researchers are portraying it. So it is important to be critical about research. And I know that in our society right now, it's important to understand that being critical of research does not mean that you don't support science. Being critical of research means that you are constantly thinking through what fits and what doesn't. You're thinking about where this applies and where it does not apply at all. Being critical of research is important for being able to consume research appropriately. Because if you just accept things because they're the printed word, because they're in a journal article, you're going to make a number of errors in judgment about what it is that you're looking at. So it's just important to be critical and question reality as it's portrayed within research. And finally, the fourth stage is really, this is where some research goes. There's no reality whatsoever in the research. It's just its own made up thing. And that has a lot to do with where researchers are coming from, certain political angles that might be impacting that research, the funding, and where it is that people are gatekeepers, researchers specifically are gatekeepers for funding. All of these things play a role. And so it's important to be able to take and understand certain research that is just not really a good reflection at all of any reality. It's manipulative in some ways. So a lot of my presentation is really giving you opportunities to think through and how to be critical of research. Again, not to dismiss it, but to be able to see what fits and what doesn't. So I'm going to jump into the thick of things and talk about these paradigms, because again, I think these help to understand researchers. If you understand researchers, I think you can better understand how to critique research. And these four components, ontology, axiology, epistemology, and methodology, the only one that really gets any attention is methodology. What are the methods being used? Yet these other three are much bigger. They're much bigger dynamics that dictate what research is being done. And so I'm going to break these down and talk about them in pragmatic terms. And while the terms themselves are important if you want to do research and learn more about where these fit, in essence, the words are not as important as what they are trying to get at. So don't stumble too much on ontology, axiology, and epistemology. It's actually more important just to think through these dynamics, because ontology is about the study of reality. And researchers are oriented to content through their version of how they see reality. And so it's important with any research to start off thinking through whose reality is being investigated, for what purpose, and through what lens is it being researched. Sometimes understanding, is this being done through an academic institution? Is this a grant funded that's paid for through the federal government, through state government? Is this something that is being paid for by a local community? Understanding those will give you what lens is the research based through. And there is a lot of debate. It's gotten less so over the past 20 to 30 years, but there still is debate about whether there is objective reality or not. Some researchers actually believe that there is an objective reality that is capital T truth in social services. I completely disagree with that, but there are researchers who believe that we are constantly looking for the capital T truth. And if someone believes that there is capital T truth in a social dynamic, they're going to approach their research in a very specific way, right? They're going to try and find ways to count. They're going to try to find ways to reflect certain phenomenon in a very concrete way. But if reality is subjective and there are multiple realities, then what reality is the researcher taking? And how is the researcher honoring the multiple lived realities that might be going on? It's any of you who have seen me present before, one of my major research topics is on intersectional oppression theory and humanizing oppression. And I believe that understanding intersectionality gives you a major advantage in understanding how to navigate different realities. But these cultural dynamics always get in the way of understanding reality, because certain groupings of people have different lived experience that are going to dictate how they respond to certain questions. So it's just important to understand, where's the researcher coming from? What realities are being reflected and why? And a big part of that, what's the researcher's background in intimate partner violence work? Did they ever work for a victim service agency? If so, did they do advocacy? Did they do administration? Did they intern for 3 months? Did they work for intimate partner violence intervention? Did they co-facilitate a battery intervention group? What context did that happen? For what length of time? I'm in a very weird and unique place where I have done direct service work for over 20 years. That very much informs my reality of how I understand and navigate research. There are a number of researchers who they get their bachelor's degrees, then they go on and get their master's degrees, and they get their doctoral degrees before they're 30 years old. And there are strengths and limitations behind that. But if that individual did not have direct service experience throughout that time of their education, doing real work with real people, that's going to dictate how they understand and see their reality and the reality of the people that they're investigating. So also, academic realities are different than service realities. So is this research truly reflecting the realities of the people who exist in their lives, in your groups, in your communities? And that is critical in understanding norming, because unfortunately, with a lot of research that is done in academic institutions, norming is done by requiring undergraduate psychology students to submit themselves to research studies, right? So they end up being the quote unquote control group, but are they really matching the reality, the lived experience of communities? You're looking at a very specific, mostly middle class experience within an academic setting. And if that's where the norm comes in, that's going to have major impacts in how they determine what's the status quo and what is the impacts of someone who is abusive or has experienced abuse and violence. So all of these are about ontology. And if you can think through in any research that you're reading, where is this researcher coming from? What are the realities this research is trying to navigate? And how is the researcher being transparent about their biases as part of that? All of those are going to give you a lot of information behind the research. Next is axiology. Axiology is the study of value and meaning. And again, all researchers have a sense of value and meaning behind their work, whether it's transparent or not. And so how do those values come through in the research? Again, like I was saying earlier, if the reality is that this researcher is being paid through grant-funded research and has this political pressure to provide results that are going to benefit the person paying for it, that is a value. Where is the value in community? Where is the value in the people being researched? What meaning is trying to be conveyed by the results of this research? Certainly, statistics are malleable in certain ways. And so which research is being chosen? How is it being analyzed? All of those are a part of value and meaning. And it seems weird to think about someone choosing a statistical analysis for a particular research study because they really value it, but it's true. I have taken many of my statistics classes for my PhD where the whole discussion is which research makes the most sense given this, this setup. And it's not necessarily an easy answer, but it is going to determine what questions you're going to ask, how you're going to collect the data, and how it is that data is going to be processed and interpreted. All of those are about the values of the researcher. Understanding those biases, as I was talking about earlier, is also important. What is my value in meaning, and how does that bias my investigation? And how and in what ways does the researcher argue for validity? So again, as mentioned at the beginning, well, maybe I didn't mention it actually. I may have talked about it before we got started, but if you're interested in validity and where that fits, particularly with the conflict tactics scale, on the Battering Intervention Services of Coalition website under the activities or events, I do have a presentation specifically geared toward validity that goes at length in talking about how validity fits into intimate partner violence research. And validity is really about how is this research measuring what it's saying it's measuring. And there are a lot of ways for researchers to state and find evidence for how they're researching. What they intend to research is what they're actually researching. But it does get enmeshed in people's values for how they see research and what makes it real or not. And also specific to IPV research, recidivism. Recidivism is a constant factor in IPV research. So how heavy is it weighed? If that is the biggest marker of quote unquote success for battering intervention, that is a challenge, because what other factors are being weighed in marking quote unquote success? And how does that fit into the findings and the interpretation of results? And how is recidivism measured? All of those things are important, but all of those indicate the value of the researcher and the value for the research. Recidivism is complicated because it's a criminogenic factor. And I'll mention this later, but intimate partner violence offenders are mostly not criminals. They have committed a domestic violence crime, usually, right? But domestic violence crimes are not property crimes, typically. They're not crimes against strangers, typically. They're not drug or alcohol related crimes, typically. They're not a combination of different crimes, typically. And so when it comes down to it, criminogenic factors are looking at criminal behavior. So stealing a car, robbing a bank, selling drugs, buying drugs, property crimes, resisting arrest, all of these different pieces that have to do with specific crimes. Intimate partner violence, the thing that I've experienced with perpetrators of intimate partner violence over the years is one of the best indicators of successfully completing a program is the fact that they never want to get in trouble again. I'm never going through that court system again. I am never doing anything that's going to get me arrested again. So they learn how not to get arrested. Does that align with the values of ending hurtful behavior in relationship? Or does that align with societal values of not getting arrested and tying up the court systems? So these are important factors to keep in mind. What are the values of the researcher, and how is the researcher navigating how they value ideas of success? Epistemology is about knowledge priority. How do people see priority in knowledge, and what knowledge do researchers seek out? So who is chosen to be researched, and by whom, and in what ways? All of those are about epistemology. Whose knowledge, whose experience is being reflected in the research? And how is the researcher's field of study informing the research? Sociology research is incredibly different than psychology research, which is different than social work research. All of these different types of research are informed partially by how that field believes knowledge is generated and how knowledge is collected. And so that does have an impact when you're looking at a research article, what journal it's being published in, what the credentials and what the background is of the researcher and where they're coming from. Because psychologists, when they do research articles, present their material differently than sociologists. And so that is a part of epistemology. And within analysis, how is that knowledge interpreted? Are there certain voices and perspectives missing? And if so, from what groups, for what reasons? And are those missing components discussed in the research? These are important things to keep in mind, because sometimes information is just thrown at you, kind of like the first slide with everything coming from all directions. And it's hard to really parse out what is missing here. but that's an important part of being critical of research. A big part of epistemology is, will this knowledge come out differently in the future? This is really challenging, particularly within psychology research. There have been replicability studies done over the past 15 years or so that have been miserable for psychology research. Replicating studies is an important part of research, is that if you lay out transparently how this research was conducted and what the results are, in theory, if you go back to a similar population and you conduct the same research, you're going to get the same results. But I believe, and I'd have to look up the specifics of this, but I believe that only 40% of the random sampling of psychology studies were able to be replicated. That's miserable. That's really bad. Because what that means is that the knowledge is only relevant to that particular place and time and that particular population. So if knowledge is not looked at as being evolving, and if researchers are not continually updating the concepts that they are putting forward in their research, that is a challenge, that is a problem, and that is a place to be critical. What are the positionalities? Where are the standpoints coming through within that research? And why are certain measurements chosen for comparison or for knowledge generation? Those are all important points I'm going to get into a little bit later. And I think it's, again, we're in a weird part of history, but critical theories are getting a really bad reputation, particularly critical race theory within our society. Although funny enough, I am a critical theorist. I probably align more with critical feminist theory, but I also believe strongly in critical indigenous theories and critical race theories. But really, when it comes down to it, the whole concept in society is baffling to me, because critical theories are just about continually questioning the origin of knowledge. It's really thinking through, where is that coming from? What perspectives are missing, and how can we incorporate perspectives that are missing within historical accounts and within research to be able to get a more connected version of reality that fits for more people? That's what critical theories are about. And when it comes to, say, critical feminist theory, that has nothing to do per se with men. It has to do with generating perspectives and experiences of women and non-men within a research standpoint. That's it. It's adding to, not taking away. So within research, how are you thinking through what perspectives are missing or what perspectives are dominant within that particular research study? Those are important questions to be asking. And finally, methodology. As I said, methodology is the philosophical paradigm that often gets all the attention. It's the rationale behind how I decide to do my study. And so within statistics, if statistics are used, then how am I analyzing it? What statistical test am I using for that data? For what reason? If qualitative approaches are used, how did I generate that data? How did I code it? How did I sort it? How did I look for triangulation of information and report back in an organized way? How does research discuss other potential ways to research the topic of interest? In theory, at the end of research articles, it's great when researchers talk about, these are the limitations, these are the other studies that could be conducted with this topic, and this is how it can move forward in the future. That doesn't always happen, but that's an important part of transparency, is for researchers to note limitations. What choices did the researchers make and for what reasons? Again, the more transparent the researcher is, the more I tend to be have more trust in that research. And this is the challenge. Methodology is the weakest paradigm. As I've gone through all of these paradigms, the other paradigms, ontology, axiology, epistemology, those all feed into who is being studied, what is being studied, when is this information oriented to, where is this research conducted, and why is this research being conducted. The only thing methodology really focuses on is how. How are we generating this research? How are we generating these results? But since that's the only discussed paradigm, how does this complicate research? And how does it complicate both us understanding research, but how does it complicate us talking about research? Methods also tend to be quantitative or qualitative or mixed. The one that's often missed is evaluation research. And I am an evaluation researcher. And it is its own kind of research, and yet it often is not talked about. It's mostly mixed, but that's not always the case in evaluation. So being able to understand which methods are being used and how they're being implemented is helpful to understand where to move forward and how to think expansively about how we can continue to improve our work. All right, so now that I've gone through all those paradigms, that's a thick bunch of stuff. I'm going to get into talking about methodologies, but before I move on, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I have 2 screens and I have the chat box up, so if anything comes through, then I will try to address it as we go along. Starting to get into methodologies, I think this quote is critical, and I will use it as often as I can. George Box is a statistician, and he started this thread of talking about research models by talking about all models are wrong. That's it. All models are wrong. Since all models are wrong, the scientist must be alert to what is importantly wrong. It is inappropriate to be concerned about mice when there are tigers abroad. George Box knew his statistics well. He knew his statistics well enough to understand that regardless of whatever analysis you use, analysis is always incomplete. All models are wrong, yet some models are useful. It's important to think about what is useful behind the research that you are looking at, not accept it as being the end-all be-all. And I remember early on in my career, I would quote statistics like it was a religion. 95% of domestic violence is men against women. Nobody ever stopped to ask me, well, Chris, where does that come from? Why is that research important, and how is it conducted? I don't know if I could answer that adequately to this day, other than to say it's usually from the FBI Uniform Crime report, and there are a lot of flaws in it. But if numbers are just thrown out to be used as numbers, then what's the point? Why do they matter? What does it mean? And how is it generated? All those things are questions to be asking, because all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So Eric's going to get into some specifics on some varying research studies that have been done for intimate partner violence work. I'm just going to talk broadly. And I'm just going to briefly go through each of these. Experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs, they're fundamentally flawed within intimate partner violence research for a lot of reasons. They are the quote-unquote gold standard. But the term gold standard is flawed in social science research anyway. It actually was a manipulated term. It started in like 1981 or 82. It was originally used by an epidemiologist and expanded to social science, even though the initial use of the term gold standard was about epidemiology and tracking diseases. It really, for human design, it's not really great when you're looking at the potential risks to victims and survivors and the potential risks to perpetrators of intimate partner violence of assigning them to a randomized category. That said, there have been some interesting studies that have been done after the fact. The Massachusetts probation study I will always think about, because they really did an interesting job of going back through court records and doing a record review and noticing when judges assigned perpetrators of intimate partner violence, they assigned them often to mental health treatment only, substance abuse treatment only, battering intervention only, anger management only, or nothing, and sometimes a combination. And they just took all those records and just looked at what happened. That was an interesting way of looking at, compared to people getting nothing, what happened when they had different services. But it's hard to do experimental designs within intimate partner violence. And quasi-experimental designs are a bit better, but still they can be problematic. Survey research designs, survey research is really hard to do well. There's a lot of really bad survey research out there. How people construct their questions, how people think through what it is they're trying to accomplish with research, all of those are really, really challenging and complicate the end results. Mixed methods can be done from qualitative, where you're collecting interviews and you're collecting focus groups and information like that, or and then go into quantitative, where you're collecting numbers through Likert scale items and such. Or you can do quantitative first, then qualitative, and both of those tend to have their own benefits. Exploratory research, I think we need more exploratory research in intimate partner violence research. I think that the initial exploratory research back in the 70s and 80s was, again, oriented to a particular time. And I think as our culture has evolved in different ways, it might be interesting to do more exploratory research on what is intimate partner violence within various cultures and various regions. What does it mean, and how does it differ? Descriptive research also could be really helpful, to go in and just start to look at a phenomenon and just describe it and try to remove the bias of the researcher and just say, this is what was happening in this given setting. Longitudinal or meta studies. Longitudinal studies are typically where you're looking at results over a long period of time. And Eric's going to talk about some meta studies, which are studies that look at all the research that's been done on this topic. How do all these research results compare? And looking at all of those together and trying to see how it all coincides. Phenomenological studies are a form of qualitative research that are seeking to explore a specific phenomenon. And again, I think this could be really useful to see more of. Actually, I think there's a great bit of research that Eric actually did that I always think about with phenomenological studies, because he did some interviews of battering intervention participants and the facilitators of those groups. And it's a small number of people that were subjects for the study, but it really explored this phenomenon in a very good way. And then qualitative research, there's grounded theory, where it's trying to come at and understand what is the theory within this setting and how is it being addressed. Ethnographic studies, which are really going into an environment and just exploring this environment within a lived experience over time. And then case studies, really looking at a particular case or approach to something over time and what the results were from various angles. So those are all different kinds of methods. And all of these methods can get different results and have different values and meaning behind them. And I know I'm running a bit short on time. I think I've got about 10 minutes. Is that correct? So I'm going to spend a little bit less time on some of these slides. But this book, Assessment of Partner Violence from 2004, I would love to see an update of this. Rathfuss and Feindler went through and collected as many instruments on intimate partner violence, both with perpetrators and victim survivors, that they could find in 2004. And I used this book to kind of narrow my search to do some critical views of intimate partner instruments, which is provided in the materials. But they really looked at intimate partner violence is pretty complicated, because while all population groups engage in violent and abusive behavior varies by cultural group, and warning, that should be norming, becomes a complicated process as a result. So there are no unified definitions of intimate partner violence. States vary in how they legally recognize intimate partner violence. Those two factors make it really difficult to understand intimate partner violence outside of a specific area or region. So if a research study is just looking at battering intervention in Indiana and is polling 3 different battering intervention groups and giving you the results of that, there's no guarantee that that has any applicability outside of Indiana, let alone the region of Indiana in which that was conducted, because the constructs are so incredibly different between areas. So since a lot of the collection of data has to do with record reviews, then the records are only as good as the records themselves. So police reports, reliance on self-reports, counts of discrete violence or abuse. Sometimes there's assessment with interviews of victim survivor, and so that complicates information. Usually there's small sample sizes in intimate partner violence work and research, and so that complicates the ability to really analyze and get good sort of numbers involved in how they analyze validity internal validity or reliability. So all those things complicate our research. So a lot of this validity piece is a bigger part of the presentation I gave last year. And I encourage you, if you'd like more information on the conflict tactics scale, to watch that. It talks about a lot of the challenges with that particular instrument since it's used so often in intimate partner violence research. But essentially, the challenge with validity is that there is a traditional concept of validity where people say this test is valid, is that this intimate partner violence test instrument is valid. If someone says that, that's not accurate. No test is valid. Validity is never about a test itself. Validity is about, does this particular test follow the purpose and approach that it was initially intended to do? Validity is about research use as intended. Am I measuring what I say I am measuring? And am I measuring it in the exact same way it was intended to be measured? And so this gets really complicated because if you see in the bottom left with that graphic, there are a lot of different kinds of validity arguments. Researchers should be making their arguments for why their particular research is valid. How does it relate to other evidence? How do the responses from participants show that they're measuring what they say they're measuring? What are the consequences of this research on the individuals, on the community? What is the content within the test, and how is that content supporting what you're saying that you're researching? What is the internal structure? Is it consistent? And do you have the same sort of responses over time? And is it reliable? Every time you take the test, are you going to get the same results? And so all these things need to be argued by researchers. But the problem is that since intimate partner violence is abstract and it's hard to measure, a lot of times when researchers say they're measuring something, I like to think about it like this. If I'm doing a concrete study and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to research if using a cell phone is fun. Fun is a very broad concept, right? What do I mean when I'm saying that it's fun? That may be much different than what someone else is saying. So if I say I'm measuring fun, but I'm not being specific about how I define fun, then there are probably a lot of other factors that I'm going to be including in my analysis that are not relevant to how I see fun. So in intimate partner violence, that is also challenging because when we're talking about violent and abusive behavior, that comes from all over the place for a lot of different reasons. And so measuring abuse and violence is so broad that sometimes there are all these constructs, there are all these dynamics, these reasons, these thoughts, these values that are underrepresenting the dynamic that's being measured. And I think it's better when researchers point out the limitations and talk about potential construct irrelevant behavior that might be presenting itself in the research. What might be contributing to these results that I didn't intend to? And when you're norming things, are they normed to an actual norm, a random sampling maybe of a community? Or is it just, college freshmen and sophomores? If that's the case, it's going to be a strange sort of application because that's a very specific idea of normal. With intimate partner violence research, I assume that all of you are clear that domestic violence is not caused by anger issues. Domestic violence is not caused by emotional issues. Yet within research, a lot of ways that research works is that if you take an instrument that's being developed, you compare it to similar instruments to see if it's consistent with these other results. So unfortunately, a lot of intimate partner violence research is comparing to anger scales, to different emotional scales. And if the research is basically saying that domestic violence is, equivalent to results on anger scales and emotional scales or substance abuse scales, isn't research saying that domestic violence is caused by these things? That's a complicated question. But it's important to understand how research works to do that, to find validity. I'm saying my instrument is the same as these other research instruments, but is it? Is that really what we're measuring here? This is complicated because how do we measure value and meaning? That's really hard to do quantitatively. That's really hard to do with numbers. How people value their partners, what meaning they have in their relationship. And unfortunately, a lot of research for intimate partner violence is based on power control analysis. Like I said, worked at Emerge for 8 years. I never used the power and control wheel at Emerge. That's not something we do at Emerge. I respect that the power and control wheel is a simple way to look at intimate partner violence, yet I don't think power and control causes domestic violence. Power is a part of being human. We all have power in different ways. It's not inherently abusive or violent. It's how you use it that matters, right? Control is a part of being human. I want to make people do things. I want to keep people from doing things for all sorts of reasons. Again, control itself is not violent or abusive. I think that if we're looking at intimate partner violence, we need to be measuring entitlement and we need to be measuring disconnect. If I am disconnected from the value of my partner, it's a lot easier for me to do things that are hurtful. If I believe I deserve something, if I believe my partner is less than me, if I believe that I am better than my partner, all those types of entitlement are going to make it easier for me to hurt my partner. So how do we show that in the research? How do the researchers demonstrate their value for respect and health? How do they instead demonstrate that they are specifically looking at entitlement and disconnect in their research? And any of you, if you've spent time looking at intimate partner violence research, there's a huge schism in research that looks at gender symmetry. There are forms of intimate partner violence that will basically equate men's and women's violence. They will say that men are equally violent to women. Women are just as violent as men. That's based on the conflict tactics scale, which is infinitely complicated. And again, you should watch my other presentation on that if you have interest in it. Because gender symmetry issues, what we talk about in battering intervention is that men's violence towards women is different than women's violence towards men. It's not to say that women can't be violent and abusive, it's just the context is different. You can't equate the two. And if you can't equate the two, then in research, if researchers are trying to say that all domestic violence is domestic violence, they're missing a huge point. So understanding where the research puts that forward is important. So I'm going to spend a little less time on this and give you the information so you can read more if you're interested. But I think it's important with statistics to extricate ourselves from focusing on numbers. We need to think more about why do the numbers give us meaning and why do they contribute to our understanding of human phenomenon. So this book, I included the first chapter in the handouts. Willful Ignorance, the Mismeasure of Uncertainty by Weisberg. Essentially, this is a quick breakdown. Statistics is public administration. It's not math. The initial beginning of statistics had to do with a cloth merchant in London, England, John Grount. He enjoyed reading the London Times every day. And so he started as a hobby to collect the bills of mortality until he had about 100 different births and deaths that he could count over the years. And what he did is he came up with this table, the life table, is that over time, more people died, of course, and so he just counted. And so he came up with this breakdown, and he did a report in 1662 to the Royal Society of London, which then distributed that, and it got a lot of attention. Scientists at the time thought it was stupid. They actually said, this is great. You just invented something that's useful for games of chance. Human beings should never be measured in this way. If you roll a 6-sided die, you're always going to get numbers 1 through 6 every single time. With humans, there are too many variables. You can't do this with humans. Yet government saw the benefits of using it because they were raising money very quickly through selling life insurance, essentially. And so they started to use these tables and created actuaries to decide how much a lifetime annuity would cost. And so as that started to happen, there was a sort of steamrolling of social science in starting to measure people, even though scientists at the time, mathematicians at the time said, this is stupid. Probability is about measuring uncertainty, not measuring certainty. Yet the use of statistics is commonly used to this day to say, oh, there's an 80% chance. that means that that's great. You need to do that because there's an 80% chance. This is problematic because in medicine, where the origin of evidence-based practice comes from, that has had a lot of questions over the past 20 years in medicine. Doctors, physicians don't use evidence-based practice in the same way as we do in social services. What they say is that we need to get back into looking at practitioner-based wisdom, because an emergency department can never use evidence-based medicine, because if it's 80% chance this procedure will work for a patient, that means there's a 20% chance that patient will die, and that is unacceptable in an emergency department. So the physician needs to use their practice-based wisdom and skill to be able to think of other potential ways to limit this person's possible death. And so it takes that wisdom mixed with the science. And yet in social science, we've started to get to this point where we're just wanting evidence as opposed to practice-based wisdom. So it's important to see where that fits within the research, and where statistics can be used in ways that the numbers are much more important than the people's understanding and the experiences of the people being impacted by that. So I'm going to transition this to Eric and to break time, which is important after me talking for so long in a row. So I think some things I want to leave you all with, and Eric's going to talk about more. I think it's important to know the strengths of IPV research. First of all, history is power. Social science research, it's been given a lot of weight by courts, politics, academics, and by default, you know, us, everybody. So why? Knowing those reasons, knowing the history of the research, understanding where it's coming from and for what purposes, that can help you. And it can help us understand what research is helpful and which research is actually detrimental to our work. IPV research tends to, in general, show a positive impact. Eric's going to get into some of the details of that, but that's actually pretty strong, even though I would disagree with the emphasis on recidivism rates and where we tend to privilege that information over others. I still think it's a good thing to keep in mind that despite the fact that our research is problematic in a lot of ways, the research does tend to point to, when given a comparison of services, battering intervention tends to be the most useful for intimate partner violence offenders. IPV research is unique. There's no research like it. So think about it. When you do substance abuse research, you focus on the person who's addicted, right? When you do mental health research, you focus on the person who has the mental illness, right? With IPV research, we focus on victims and perpetrators of intimate partner violence. And that gives multiple perspectives to an individual violent and abusive behavior, right? It's different. And so understanding that is helpful because there's a lot of great innovations within different types of work. Sex offender treatment, that's where I started my career. I still reference and use some of the understandings I gained from that orientation to my work today. Substance abuse treatment. Again, I've done some substance abuse counseling over the years, and there's a lot of stuff in there that's really useful. Mental health treatment. All of those are really helpful insights. And battering intervention research, intimate partner violence research, we can learn from these models as long as it's not copied without adaptation. Is that there are some research models out there that just copy things and they don't change the context, and that is a problem. Knowing the limits, scrutinizing numbers. It's helpful to know with numbers that are used in reports, what do they mean? How is significance found? And how is it reported back? It's important to make connections with statisticians, researchers, academics, scientists, people that you can trust, and ask about data if you don't fully understand it. Just using a number because you heard a number is not as useful as being able to explain what that number means. And so I will always challenge people, if you're going to use statistics, be able to talk about it. How does this provide insight into what it is you're trying to accomplish? If you can do that, you're in a good place. So connect with those people that can help you with that. Recidivism is faulty. I've talked about that quite a bit. Practice-based wisdom, I talked about that quite a bit. The last point that I want to bring forward is a major problem with IPV research. Duluth is not a model. The Duluth model is not what people say it is, particularly in research. The Duluth model is the community coordinated response. It has nothing to do with the battering intervention curriculum. The battering intervention curriculum with Duluth is a part of the community coordinated response. But what matters with the Duluth model is making sure everyone in the community is on the same page and working together to provide services for victims and survivors, to work on offender accountability, and to work to make the community safer. If a research is talking about the Duluth model, but it's not talking about community coordinated response, you can take that research and you can give a lot of salt with it, because it is misrepresenting battering intervention as a whole. So I cannot emphasize that as more, is that if you say Duluth model, just be clear. If you're using the Duluth curriculum, that's great. But the Duluth curriculum is not the Duluth model. And be clear about that when you're reading research. All right, so that's it for me. Break time, is that the case? David, are we doing 5 minutes?
We're going to do 5 minutes. I'm going to do my best to learn from the folks in Duluth about putting a timer clock up in the window. So go ahead, folks, take a break, get yourself another cup, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Well, I almost had that time just right. Welcome back, everybody. Eric, if you can take over the helm here, we will go ahead and get started with you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you today. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Mankowski. I'm a professor at Portland State University, and I really appreciate the invitation from the New Mexico Coalition and the opportunity to be here today with you all. I want to just check and verify that you can see on screen the slides that I'm presenting to you. Great. I have a couple of other talks that I've given on this topic that David's put some links up for this morning, and I'd like to get these presentation slides to you, and I think I'll be getting some opportunity to do that after the talk today. We can't seem to upload the slides due to security in the chat today, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along well enough with these slides. Just wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm a community psychologist, which is a public health version of psychology. We focus on empowerment and prevention rather than treatment. And I've been doing work with battering intervention programs for about 20 years, both as a researcher and as someone who's gotten involved in policy and practice. I'd like to get to know you all a little bit more as well, and just start off with a couple of simple questions to hear both a little bit about where you're at today. Maybe some of us are thinking about the winter holidays at the end of this week, and have our minds on that. I'm curious to know, what are your travel plans for the winter holidays? There's a lot of eager anticipation over the next few weeks of time with families, times with friends, spending time taking a break from our busy work lives. All of you, I'm sure, are very dedicated and committed to the work that you're doing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here this morning. And this year, of course, is different, like last year was different. And many of us are asking questions about whether I should travel and who I should spend time with. So I was curious. Looks like most of you will not be traveling. You can see some of the responses you've given here to get you a feel for what some quick survey research is like. Chris talked about some of the limitations of survey research. We'll be talking about some of those more. I think I've got another poll question here that's a little bit more about what you hope to get out of this session today. If you were to list one of these as your top priority, what would be your top priority for this session? To learn about findings on battering intervention programs, to learn how to better evaluate and understand the research, to learn why and how to form collaborations with researchers, or to learn about resources for doing research yourself. All right, I think that's most of all of you chimed in about that. The top priority looks to be learning more about the research findings on battering intervention. And I'll be talking about that some today, but as I mentioned as well, I've got a longer talk that I have the opportunity to give here today. And David sent a link to that talk with a video and PowerPoint slides to you earlier in the chat this morning. A major hope that I have as well for our session today, and many of you as the second choice priority, was to learn how to better understand and evaluate the research. I'll skip over the first part of my talk pretty quickly, which focuses on how to form research collaborations with researchers, both because it looks like it's a low priority and just for time's sake. I forgot to share those with you. There you go. You can see. So thinking about research, I think Chris made a number of really great points about how complex research is and what we need to understand to be able to utilize research. I have a question for you in terms of your relationship with research as you think about it on this early Wednesday morning, right before the holidays. As Rachel alluded to at the top of the program today, it may not be the topic that's most exciting to you. Some of us have statistical or math phobias or fears. Research isn't what got us into doing this work at all. We may want to know, what we're doing, whether it works, right? We don't want to be doing any harm, and we care deeply about that. But beyond that, our interest in research might be pretty limited. So I'm curious to hear from you. As you think about your relationship with research, using this hopefully humorous metaphor here. Never explored it much. After Chris's talk, I have some new excitement about the possibilities here. Or thirdly, I've been doing or thinking about research and reading research and using research in my program and my work quite a long time, or I used to, but not so much anymore. Okay, looking at the findings here, it looks like there's quite a variety of levels of experience and interest and knowledge about research. I'm pleased and excited to see that for most of you, or maybe not most, all of you, but the most common response, 39%, said this is something that you've been interested in for a long time. Others of you are sort of saying, hey, this is new. I'm kind of excited about this, about a quarter of you. And some others, about 35% of you, are saying, yeah, not so much, or used to, but not so much now. So that's really helpful for me to get a perspective on where you're at with research this morning as we go forward. And I'll, as I said, really try to attend to those priorities and interests that you have in light of our time here. I'll say to start with here, and see if I can get my screen working for myself a little bit better here so that I can see what I want to say. There we go. Based on a lot of meta-analyses that Chris talked about briefly, I think increasingly people who I encounter in this field, policymakers, researchers, and those of you working in the field, are telling each other, and we have the belief that BIPs are not effective. And often I think research has been misunderstood, and I would argue that evidence indicates otherwise. And so it's important for you to be able to understand and evaluate research, because decisions are being made based upon research that are affecting what you have the ability to do as a battering intervention program, what the state standards are in different states across the US, including there in New Mexico, I know. And I want you to be able to, after this talk, be better at evaluating the research that's done on battering intervention programs, to know how to advocate for programs, and to know how to utilize that research to impact the policy and practice decisions that are being made. So to do that, I'm suggesting that we want to have research practice partnerships, and I'm going to be skipping over this just given what I've heard you saying in your interest pretty quickly here in our time. Basically, I think research is important to have literacy among research literacy among practitioners in order to both improve what we're doing as BIP providers, as probation officers, as judges. We need to be aware of research that points us towards best practice. And we also need to utilize research because, as I said, decisions are being made that affect battering intervention programs based on research. Myself and my colleagues did a national study a few years ago, interviewing the chair or other leader of the state standards for battering intervention programs about how they utilize and implement research and standards in their states. And we found, that 2/3 of programs, really, excuse me, about 70% of states were saying, yeah, we use research to inform our standards. And when we revise our standards, especially, we draw on the best and newest research to revise and update those standards. So it's important to be able to make friends, in this context. Many of us had poor math teachers. Other of us have, preferences for qualitative information. We developed fear. We developed distrust about math or statistics, and we, I think, disidentified with research, or we distrusted math and statistics, or we thought, I don't really know how this works. And so I'm going to avoid it. And so one of my goals today is to help you gain some confidence and some familiarity with evaluating research to hopefully have less of a fear of it and be able to engage it some. As you think about the word research, I'd be really curious to hear if you would throw into the chat. I don't think we have as much time for a breakout room today as I was hoping to discuss this. But when I say the word research, or when you hear the word research, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Throw it into the chat and hear what you each other have to say. What kind of concepts, feelings come up when you hear the word research? Take a second to put that into the chat to everyone. Evidence-based. Aaron says evidence-based, absolutely. Evidence-based practice is what we think about when we hear research often in this field. Facts, study to determine facts, Jennifer. Gathering information to see your effectiveness, Johnny, yes. Data. All these are great answers. Keep coming. As I continue, keep throwing those into the chat. Some of our associations with research are based upon stereotypes of both researchers and practitioners. We may think of Frankenstein research or researchers as the kind of Frankenstein experimenters. We may think of mad scientists, distant or aloof statistics, right? Researchers being naive or out of touch. There may be great harm that comes to your mind. The Tuskegee experiments. If you don't know about the Tuskegee experiments, I encourage you to Google that and educate yourself about that. A lot of communities of color distrust researchers and research for very good reasons in this country. There's been unethical practices. We may think that science is fake, or that we can't trust any statistics or data. It's too complex for me to understand. On the other hand, I think practitioners are often held in stereotypic manner by researchers, thinking they're naive or biased or touchy-feely or overly emotional or unsystematic, right? And so I think we each, both researchers and clinicians, practitioners, social workers, advocates, have stereotyped views of each other that keep us apart. And I think there's a great value for us working together. We can use research. I'm going to actually skip over this slide. We can research and do research together. One of the models that I think is useful for us to think about doing research together is community-based participatory research. This is a different kind of research than the experimental research that Chris was, I think, effectively critiquing in his presentation. The tagline for community-based participatory research, which I've done throughout my career, is nothing about me without me. And this model of research, quote unquote, research subjects who are researched become researchers in collaboration with academic researchers, where we together decide on research questions, on the design of our studies, and work to conduct research that's mutually designed and beneficial and responsive to the questions and issues in local communities. Some of that community-based participatory research may be focused on action research, where we attempt to change something, and instead of just observing the world in order to learn about it, we actually try to change the world and then see what happens when we do a new experiment or an effort to change. And we reflect on that change, and this cycle of research, action, and reflection is repeated. So these kinds of models, I think, are very possible for us as collaborators in our research to do together in partnership with each other. We need to explicate our values, clarify our roles, clarify our responsibilities and obligations to each other. But if we do this in an equitable and reciprocal and power sharing manner, I think there's a lot of value to research for the practitioner world that you all generally live in, that I'm calling practitioners. They're victim advocates, survivor advocates, judges, probation officers, battering intervention providers. I'm going to refer to you collectively as practitioners in this talk. And you know, there's some exemplars of this happening throughout the US. Here in Oregon, where I work, there's some great research between myself and programs throughout the state happening. But I would also point to Maryland, Colorado, people like Lisa Nietzsche and Chris Murphy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Lisa at House of Ruth, have wonderful partnerships over many, many years to conduct research that is local, informative, and mutually designed in this kind of way that I'm speaking about here. In Colorado, a number of academic researchers joined with folks throughout the CCR, Coordinated Community Response there, and developed a domestic violence offender management board that we may disagree or agree about the value of that particular board, and the risk assessments that they're doing there to assign people to battering intervention programs of different lengths and content. But we can agree, hopefully, that the state is doing work there that represents a wonderful partnership between researchers and practitioners. All right, well, I'll take a breath and skip now to, really becoming more of an informed consumer, which is what all of you were mostly interested in. How do I develop more research literacy in this language of data and statistics and numbers in the area of battering intervention? So part of what brings you here and your interest in knowing what works, I think, is a lot of unsubstantiated soundbite claims about battering intervention programs that you may hear. Chris alluded to the complexity of research, but those research studies are often reduced to very brief sound bites. These sound bites are like a telephone game, if you're familiar with that, or the party game, where someone whispers into someone's ear a kind of a long sentence, and by the time that sentence gets repeated throughout the room, between 3 and 4 people, it gets passed down the line, and the end person hears something entirely different whispered into their ear than the first person actually spoke. And I think this is what happens to research as it gets transmitted throughout and transferred into our practice communities, right? Is that BIPs don't work. No study demonstrates Duluth is effective. State standards are not evidence-based. Or in the case of a recent online advertisement for online anger management classes, they're scientifically based and proven effective, right? So there's all kinds of unsubstantiated soundbite claims based on research that you're needing to navigate. And so there's, important to unpack these and go up the telephone game, up the line there. For example, here is a quote with a little bit of complexity to it from Julia Babcock and colleagues' 2004 meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, combining all of the results into one big study. Thus, Babcock concludes there's a 5% increase in success rate attributable to treatment. To a clinician, this means that a woman is 5% less likely to be reassaulted by a man who was arrested, sanctioned, and went to a batter's program than by a man who was simply arrested and sanctioned. Now, some of you, actually, I'll keep going here. A 5% decrease in violence may appear insignificant. However, batterers' treatment in all reported cases of domestic violence in the United States would equate to approximately 42,000 women per year no longer being battered. This is an excerpt from this meta-analysis that you may have heard of. In the field, this meta-analysis is often quoted as indicating battering intervention programs are proven to have no effect. Okay? It's an example of how research that is complex and nuanced, which Babcock's analysis is. It points to how this effectiveness rate depends in part upon the kinds of research methodology that's used to evaluate the battering intervention program. But that soundbite of battering intervention programs don't work isn't an accurate reading, I believe, of Babcock's work, as you can see from this, for example, more extended quote. So how do we become informed consumers of research? Asking are BIPs effective is not the right question. It's too simple. It's an oversimplified question. I encourage you to be thinking when you hear about research on battering intervention. First of all, ask, is it a BIP that's being evaluated? There's a lot of variation and diversity in intervention programming that gets counted and lumped together under BIP. Second, ask, how is effectiveness even being defined, as Chris offered to us, right? Whose voices are included? Survivors, abusers? Is it based on recidivism data? What about the racial bias in criminal justice reports and arrests? How long after the intervention were people followed? And compared to what? Compared to what are we saying that BIP is effective or ineffective? To no treatment, to an alternative program, to community service, to jailing. Find out who was actually studied. There's many cases of battering intervention research studies done in which no single group was even attended by some of the participants assigned to treatment. We call this an intention to treat research design, in which people were randomly assigned to either battering intervention or some alternative. And because they never showed up for even their first intake assessment, or they dropped out of the program after the intake assessment, or after their first or second session, these people never were really exposed even to battering intervention programs, but they nonetheless are, as researchers do, counted in the treatment group because they were assigned to go to treatment. So these, what we call intention to treat research designs, are better thought of as not evaluating a battering intervention group or curriculum or program, but rather a kind of evaluation of the coordinated community response and how much monitoring there might be for people to even get to the battering intervention program or stay in it. And then finally asking yourself, or asking the research study, what's the evidence provided for battering intervention, or any program that is, that you might be looking at? What's the evidence for that working as well as, or better than, or not as well as some alternative? In other words, what is this being compared to? So to say a little bit more about this, some research on recent BIPs included programs with mixed gendered groups, with couples counseling, with programs as short as 12 sessions, or with programs dating back to the 1980s. A whole lot of variation in what gets called a BIP is lumped together sometimes. There's a lot of heterogeneity in these programs. And so when we draw conclusions about BIP, we might be mixing apples and oranges together. I made some of these points earlier a moment ago. We often are using research designs that randomly assign people to treatment who never show up and nonetheless evaluate them because they were assigned to it as having been part of the treatment group. That's an evaluation of the criminal justice system's workings, not just the battering intervention program. We need to broaden our measures of success. We get different information from survivors, from offenders, from police reports, from different kinds of criminal recidivism. Most IPV is not illegal, right? Most IPV is legal. And so if we're only focused on illegal forms of physical abuse and criminal rearrest for those, we're missing huge amounts of information that's valuable in understanding whether and how programs work. Also, we need to ask, well, how long was this follow-up tracked? Is this at the conclusion of the program, at the program exit? Is this 2 weeks after, 2 months, or 2 years after the program is completed to know how long and whether or not this program worked for how long? So if we go beyond recidivism, we can measure the impacts of IPV interventions, whether it's victim advocacy programs or battering intervention programs, in a lot more complex ways than whether or not there's contact with the criminal justice system again. McGinn and colleagues have done some wonderful work on survivors' perceptions of BIP participants' changes in the program and following the program. Chris referred to some research that I've done asking about facilitators' perspectives on successful clients' change. So we asked facilitators to nominate people who we thought were the most model cases in their program. And we interviewed those participants about how they changed, what enabled the change, and how did they know that they had changed, and where did they see that change showing up in their lives. And then we also interviewed the facilitators about what they observed in the group and in these individuals who were successful. And we heard some really important stories that we were able to use to inform more information about how change occurs, when it does. And then based on that, we were able to build a measure of the process of change, a survey questionnaire that tried to assess whether these indicators of change along the way were present. I'll talk with you a little bit more about that later. Ed Gondolf studied how participants themselves talk about their avoidance of re-abuse or abuse. There's anthropologically related studies where people have done intensive amounts of observation of battering intervention program groups for a year's period of time and analyze the rhetorical and narrative features of those groups. Morrison and colleagues have recently analyzed participants' letters of accountability that they wrote upon exiting the program and looking at the content of those and the motives expressed in those. Gondolf and colleagues looked at clinicians, so that is facilitators' ratings about whether they thought the participants were engaging in certain kinds of behaviors in the group or not. And finally, Morrison's done a study looking at participants' perceptions of their interactions with other peer participants in the BIP group. All of these provide really useful information beyond the question of, did this person criminally recidivate again or not? A lot of decisions are made about battering intervention curriculum programs in states across the US right now based on meta-analyses. You need to understand that meta-analysis is a study of studies where we aggregate all the participants across different studies and try to evaluate whether there's some aggregate result here that can be more reliable and more trustworthy than any single study is on its own. An important question to ask when you hear about Babcock's meta-analysis or the Washington State Institute of Public Policy meta-analysis that Marna Miller did, or Chang's meta-analysis that's recently published. What studies were included and excluded? These studies are the same as any research study, only as valid to the populations from which participants were sampled, right? So some meta-analyses include or exclude different studies based on criteria of those original studies. Were the studies done recently? Did they have a randomized control group? And so forth. Find out what's actually being compared. Is this program effect being compared to no treatment, to jail, to an alternative battering intervention program curriculum? You know, maybe comparing a Duluth curriculum, so-called, and a so-called cognitive behavioral curriculum, which actually have a lot of common features, right? Maybe that's not a valid comparison. And finally, what are the outcomes being assessed, right? Just to give you a little bit of example of what I'm talking about here, here is a meta-analysis just published this year by Chang and colleagues, compared to what, question mark, a meta-analysis of battering intervention studies using non-treated controls or comparisons. You might be daunted looking at a graph like this if you were to see this research table. Let me walk you through it. In the top half here are non-RCT studies. That means that they were not randomized control trials where participants were either randomly assigned to battering intervention or to a untreated, quote unquote, comparison or control group. And the ones in the second half of the table here, these RCT studies were, right? Setting aside the statistical numbers over here on the right side, let me just walk you through what this table means. First of all, this point shows the relative odds, in this case, of criminal justice recidivism. That's the dependent measure, what we call the outcome variable here. This is the effect that was noted in this particular study by Dutton in 1986, excuse me. And it's talking about the relative odds of criminal recidivism in the treated compared to the untreated control group. Next, we have this band here, which is a range of confidence that we have in that research based upon the variation in all the different participants in that study, right? And so where this band lies is our confidence interval. And then thirdly, there's a vertical line here on this chart that is anchored on this x-axis down here at the point of 1. And that means that the relative odds of recidivism are equal in the untreated and in the treated groups. And so what we want to know is any study that's falling on the left side of this line shows potentially a relative odds of treated groups being less likely to recidivate. However, if our band of confidence crosses this line of equal odds, then we can't determine from that study whether or not there actually is a reliable effect different from 0 or equal odds of recidivating in the treated and untreated groups. Now, what you can see is that there's a lot of points to the left side of this line indicating a lot of these studies, the average odds, or not the average odds, excuse me, the relative odds are in advantage for the treatment. But also a lot of these confidence bands cross or touch on that line, so we can't actually conclude that the study shows that the treated groups are more effective than the untreated groups. However, in a meta-analysis, we combine all of these effects, and that's down in this diamond shape here, and it shows in the non-randomized control studies, there actually is a reliable effect of programs where the treated were less likely to recidivate than the untreated control groups. That diamond shape does not touch, the equal bar here, equal line. And so we know in non-randomized control trials, we had a reliable effect. Whereas in the randomized control trial, it's less clear, right? It's closer to and touches on the 1 equal odds line here. And then overall, across all study designs, randomized and non-randomized control trials, we see that this diamond does not touch the 1. Here's a brand new 2021 meta-analysis that shows a reliable treatment effect of battering intervention programs. And yet I have seen this study cited and discussed as showing evidence that criminal recidivism shows in this meta-analysis that there's no reliable effect of battering intervention. It's misquoted, it's misreported. I think it's misinterpreting the data. And that's why I hope that I can walk through, this kind of work to give you a greater sense of literacy about what you're reading. Okay, we know that this question is limited. Does it work? It's oversimplified. A better question is, how does it work? For whom, when, under what conditions, in what community context, right? How good is the coordinated community response? If people were randomly assigned, how often did they show up and complete treatment? In the interest of time and leaving some for discussion here, I'm just going to jump ahead lastly to some resources for you to access to better put you in touch with research. First of all, I've got some websites here that give you some tools for developing research studies on your own programs. There's one from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention here. There's one from the American Evaluators Associations. These are two great sites to get you started doing research on your own program. Some other tools for administering survey research can be very useful. There's the Google Forms app, there's Qualtrics, and there's SurveyMonkey. And all of these online tools can be really useful for designing research surveys that can be used to answer questions that you have about the work that you're doing and its impact. For example, one of my community partners here, Chris Huffine with Allies in Change Agency, recently with me and my research students, designed an exit survey using the Google Forms app to ask participants in the Allies in Change program about their program knowledge, skills, and attitudes as they leave the program. It's not a randomized control trial, but it provides really useful information to the program about what participants are internalizing as a result of being in the program, or at least what they're reporting they internalize, right? We also designed a survey to ask providers throughout the state about the changes in their practices and structure that they've made, if any, due to COVID. So we did a quick, easy to design survey, disseminated it throughout the state of Oregon, had anonymous responses coming back, and got lots of valuable information about how programs have adapted to COVID. And then we're using that information at our state advisory committee on battering intervention standards to say, hey, how does the standards need to address evolving practices and structures that programs are making due to COVID? Here's two other resources for evaluating BIPs. One is a website that David shared with me about DV risk assessment tools for risk assessment for domestic violence and for homicide. And one is a tool for measuring these proximal outcomes in programs rather than the distal outcome of violence. What are the changes that people are making, if any, along the way in the program to their attitudes about power and control, to their responsibility that they assume for domestic violence perpetration, for understanding the effects of abuse on themselves and their partners and families, for their feelings of dependency on their partner, and other what we call proximal outcomes. That is, things that aren't the ultimate maybe violence-free outcome or abuse-free outcome that we're looking for, but some things that enable that outcome to happen along the way. And then I think lastly here, there's a number of resources for you to access research. One of the great barriers that I hear in the field is people saying, I can't get a hold of research, right? It's behind a paywall. I'm not going to pay $60 to pay for a study. You know, it's too much, or $100 to pay for a study. You should know, first of all, about Google Scholar. It's free. If you use Google, you can get abstracts for research, at least through Google Scholar, of any research that's been done. Public libraries are another great. You can show up. There's 9,000 public libraries in the US, and they have materials that you can browse online often. And if not, go there in person. You have a right in a public library to access those resources in person. Most importantly, I want to emphasize PubMed's Central Digital Archive. This is a resource from the National Institute of Health. It has 7.5 million articles from over 2,500 scientific journals. And this comes about because of the public access policy of our National Institute of Health to ensure that the public has access to published results of peer-reviewed research that was funded by who? By you, by the taxpayers of the United States, the public. We have a right, having funded that research, to access it. It shouldn't be behind a paywall of a private for-profit journal. If you go to this website here, you can search that website. And for example, here's what you'll see. I just did a search earlier this week, as you can see, on batter intervention. And I turned up 419 articles in this database that you can have the full text for free right on this site. So use this, go back and use this link here. You'll have these slides from me shortly, and you can copy and use that link. The VAWA-Net, or the Violence Against Women Net, is a project of the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. It includes peer-reviewed and other non-peer-reviewed research articles on IPV. Encourage you to use it. The CDC has data sets that you can actually access to look at state level and national data on IPV, including this web-based injury statistics query and reporting system, or WHISKERS. All right. And then, of course, people like me, academic researchers, contact your local university. And I know you are doing that. I know that there's people from UNM working with you at the coalition, and talk with them, ask them for research. This is what the VAWA-Net website looks like. Definitely a searchable database. This is the CDC's website on IPV resources that has publications, data sources, and many other kinds of sources for empirical information. So in conclusion, let me wrap up and say, please educate yourself on the research on BIP effectiveness. Know the standards in New Mexico and in other states too, so that you can learn how your standards relate to those in other states. And discuss this research that you're reading from my talks, from your own investigation, with people in your coordinated community response, and be asking questions when you hear research, critical questions about how is it that this claim is being made that this program works or this program doesn't work. Use those questions and show up and participate with each other to the extent that we dialogue and that you dialogue in your CCR about research and learn literacy in it and understand it and feel empowered to use it. You're going to be able to, I think, protect, battering intervention as one important aspect of the CCR, but just one important, but not the whole thing, but one important aspect of our CCR from changes that are being made in many states across the US based upon this kind of miscited research that says, battering intervention doesn't work. And so I encourage you to, move in that direction. And I thank you for your commitment and dedication to working to end IPV. And I want to leave at least, if I can, 10, 15 minutes for discussion.
Thank you, Eric and Chris. This has been phenomenal. Looking forward to any questions that people have. You can either unmute and ask them. You can raise your Zoom hand. Or you can put it into the chat. I'm going to start with this question for both of you. And it's an unfair question, but I know you both personally, and I know that you'll forgive me for asking you an unfair question. So you're stuck in an elevator for a good 60 seconds with your local judge or your local DA, and they say, I heard that battering intervention programs don't work. You got 60 seconds to change their mind. What do you say? And you're both muted.
I can respond briefly to that in less than 60 seconds, David. I mean, one of the things that I would say is I would talk about this short answer. And again, I don't think sound bites are helpful often, but you've set us up in a 60-second situation here. So, this sound bite here, the most comprehensive study to date shows 50% relative reduction in violence and abuse of men who complete battering intervention based on partner reports as well. This is based on Ed Gondoff's work that was done in 4 programs in different states in the US. And it's the most comprehensive because they had excellent follow-up with survivors and partners about whether they had been abused over a period of 2 years following the completion of the program. So based on that data, this is what I conclude. And as I said, the most recent new meta-analyses do both show, both Chang's meta-analysis and Gannon's meta-analysis show reliable positive effects of battering intervention programs.
Okay.
And I would say neither do antibiotics. Antibiotics only work when they're used properly. They only used when they're taken for the full dose. They only use if you have an issue with bacteria infection in your body. It's not about whether they work or not, it's how they work and who they work for. So we should be conscious about having a service that pays particular attention to relationship violence. That is the point of what these groups are about. And there are very few places where that is the exclusive focus. So there's research out there all over the map, and we can look through the research, and I can give you studies that will talk about the benefits, talk about the limitations, but really that research is less important than the fact that it works for those it works for. And just like antibiotics, you need to know, why are you using it for, in what ways, and is it for the length of stay, or is it just for one time? That would be my response.
Excellent. Thank you both. And let's get some other questions going here. Make the most of this last 10 minutes, everyone. What questions do you struggle with in your community, in your BIPs, in your own mind as you're putting your head on the pillow to say goodnight to everybody? What is bothering you or keeping you awake at night regarding the research around BIPs?
I'm curious to hear if people want to say, or maybe you want to throw into the chat, either way, what are you hearing about research? When you hear research cited in your work, what are the claims that it's making?
Just thought of one piece that, Eric, we didn't really touch on either, which is that it's important to keep in mind that one of the major pieces that we are constantly battling against is media perspectives of intimate partner violence, and the stereotypes and the very poorly defined information that's out there in movies, television shows, and music. And that if we're not presenting a more human angle to intimate partner violence, we're kind of missing the boat in a lot of ways. Research is not quote unquote sexy. It's not something that's easy to digest, but watching Made on Netflix certainly is. And so people talk about that left and right, regardless of what the research might be on it. So how do you make this compelling? How do you make this information important? And how do you bring this into a community in a way that will support the work that you're doing to end intimate partner violence? That's a whole other topic in many.
Well, Chris, that's why we are all invested in you getting your PhD, so you can just do that.
I see Aaron has a chat. That's a great point, Chris. And I see Aaron has a chat question. What bias do we need to avoid as we review research? And I think that's a great question. It goes to the heart of what I was trying to, speak to. Is when you look at research, how do you know how to evaluate it? And so in terms of your own bias, first of all, do you have an axe to grind? Become aware of what your own motives are for looking at research, right? What would I like to see in the research? And have that present in your mind as you review the research, so that you make sure that you don't pick and choose research selectively to support your points, right? So that's one of the reasons why, having many different kinds of research and many different sources of research to review is so helpful, because it helps overcome the bias or limitations in any particular single study.
And I personally both like and hate rabbit holes, but I find myself in them all the time with my biases. Is that if I'm reviewing research and it's referencing a study or a component of research I don't trust, I will go and read the original research. And it takes a lot of time, but like, for instance, with the conflict tactics scale, if I go back and read the original research, I can see the flaws and how they're talked about today in a much clearer light. And so if you have biases, if you're thinking through and you're recognizing something that you don't agree with, try to go to the source that the individual researcher is citing to see if even they're using it correctly. Because I have come across research where a researcher shorthanded used one quote out of a research study, missed the entire point of the research study. And researchers are human beings. They're flawed. They put things forward. And so part of your biases is not just to accept it because it's in the research. Go and read the research that they're using if it seems funny to you. And that can be a challenge because you may have to go down a rabbit hole, but off to it.
Chris, you muted yourself, but you may have been at the end of what you were saying. Eric, I just put 3 words into the chat: facts, opinion, and agendas. And I was chatting with Chris about this. And right now, I think those 3 things aren't necessarily in the right order for what's happening in the research world. I think it's probably agendas, opinions, and facts. And I'm curious what you think about that as an analysis of some of the pitfalls of research.
David, thanks. That's a great succinct way to describe it. We have, unfortunately, a real questioning of the value of science, right, in our society right now, which I take to mean what you talk about with facts there. Mm-hmm. I don't think science and facts are the same. I think Chris spoke about that, eloquently, but they're certainly closely related. So where we have a climate in which facts and science are distorted or mistrusted based on legacies of abuse or current popular motives, opinions, and agendas, I think that the facts are hidden sometimes, and you have to dig deeper yourself to get underneath the soundbite or the agenda that's driving a particular selective use or selective quotation of a study or of research.
Oftentimes, reading the research feels like you're reading the ingredients on a highly industrialized thing that you eat, breakfast cereal, and it's like, I've got to get a dictionary, as well as the Tabor's medical dictionary. I've got to get all kinds of information to help me understand this. So maybe I'll just buy something that says oats. It's really simple and really clear. How do we know when we're looking at something that has been stepped on by science versus oats?
So I find this funny to say this because I think this is something that Pam Wiseman would actually very much appreciate, because I know her line of thinking behind a lot of these components. I'm in a weirdly situated position right now, coming to the end of my doctoral work, in understanding the infiltration of neoconservative and neoliberal interests into research, particularly evaluation research, and how it impacted public policy in the early and late 1980s. And in fact, all of those are blended together because of that. And science was corrupted in many ways at that time, and disentangling ourselves at this point is going to be very challenging because it's all been co-opted. So all of the things that I brought forward, the esoteric understanding of the paradigms of research, those help to disentangle. If you can pay attention to meaning, if you can pay attention to value behind knowledge and how people are viewing realities, you can start to sort those things out. However, the way that the trajectory of social science research has gone, it's been corrupted by capitalistic and neoconservative and neoliberal interests. And that's very sad, but very true for how our public policy has gotten to where it is today.